Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. Yes, designers do have that role. You know, it's very hard for so many people to understand what design is about. Some people think it's art, and usually art people think instead it's engineering, and everybody else thinks it's decoration, and they look for it on Thursday in the House and Home section of the New York Times. So we all know instead that design is really part of life, and in particular, it's a fundamental ingredient for progress. Because when technology, people, and when scientists create revolutions, discover something new, designers are the ones that make these revolutions into objects that people actually can use. And Design and the Elastic Mind, the exhibition that we organized 2 years ago, was exactly about that. It was about design and science. The next show, which is the one that I would like to introduce to you today, because I need your help, actually, is called Talk to Me. And it's about the communication between people and objects. You know, objects talk to us. They always have, even when they were inanimate. But today, because of technology, this conversation is even more overt. And objects have faces. They have interfaces that communicate with us, that help us work through life, that instruct us and give us information. And of course, you can go back and look at history, but also quite recent history, and check out some great examples like the barcode or the nutrition facts label. I would like to include these in the MoMA collection because they are great examples of design and great examples of communication even before the digital age. In the exhibition and in the collection, we're trying to think of including also interfaces. For instance, Tim Berners-Lee World Wide Web, also Mosaic, and then the first graphical user interface. As you can imagine, these interfaces create really huge problems on how to conserve them, how to show them, and how to include them in the collection. Just recently, a colleague of mine was at Xerox PARC in Palo Alto talking to the people that actually created the first graphic user interface, and she discovered that there's no video, there's no program, there's not even the old computer, nothing has been kept. So how do you show the history of interaction? It's another really interesting issue that we want to address with this exhibition and with the show. And of course, we also want to show a timeline of the great interfaces that came after the first 1981 interface of the Star computer. All the different operating systems on the Mac, and all the way onto the interfaces of today. Part of the world of design that we also want to include at MoMA are the interfaces that we use in everyday life. For instance, the MetroCard machine that we see in every subway station in New York City, or the JetBlue self-service check-in kiosks at the JetBlue terminals. So we're surrounded by examples of objects with faces that communicate with us. And I think that it is the job of a place like the Museum of Modern Art to help, on the one hand, people understand how to evaluate these interfaces, and on the other hand, to help designers and engineers create a new baseline for quality in the design of the interface. Interfaces also exist to help the whole world communicate. The scale of communication goes from the spoon or the micro-robot to the city. And I'm showing to you here great examples of interfaces that are at the scale of cities. This is a museum in Graz, in Austria, where the whole skin of the building, you see it's a very biomorphic building designed by Peter Cook. The whole skin is covered with these panels that are very low-tech. They're basically neon tubes that turn on and off according to a quite rudimentary programming system. And it's transformed into a gigantic screen where images and some kind of rudimentary messages can be transmitted. So the building itself becomes an interface. We've seen it happen also in other places. For instance, you see lower left is a building in Tokyo that actually has tags that can be reprogrammed. So every day there's a different, very complex message, almost a narrative. Up on top, of course, I'm sure you all know the throwies that were created a few years ago. And instead, on the right, is a beautiful project that was actually only remained a concept, but it's the idea of how to show New Yorkers what would happen if the waters of the ocean went up about 5 degrees. The 8th floor of Park Avenue is where the waters would rise. So you think of turning everything off and leaving only the 8th floor lights up. So really communication can be used at many different scales and helps us understand reality better. One of the most important branches of design today is information design and visualization. Nothing new, it's existed forever. But today, the computational capabilities that we have at our disposal really demand some designers to come into play and help not only the public at large, but sometimes also experts understand the meaning of data. As I was telling you, it's nothing new. It's existed forever, and we have great examples also in the history of design of the 20th century. This is the famous Mathematica exhibition by Charles and Ray Eames, which was installed in Los Angeles until the Science Museum of Los Angeles closed in the 1990s, and is now installed here at the Queen's Museum. A great example of how to communicate concepts that might be difficult in a playful, elegant, and approachable way. And isn't that what design is about? It certainly is when it comes to visualization. And even when it comes to digital data, elegance, understandability, and even engagement of the public is what designers can provide. You're looking here at a beautiful visualization from a few years ago. It was from 2004, actually 2006, Martin Wattenberg and Fernanda Viegas, visualizing the editing wars on different Wikipedia entries. This beautiful Missoni-like tapestry is actually representing different editors fighting over the span of about 3 months on the entry abortion. We also have another really interesting tapestry that is a little bit more zigzaggy, less extreme, but equally interesting about chocolate. So we took these two pretty controversial topics and saw how each editor has a different color, and then you see over time the peaks and valleys. So when you see something like this, it's at the same time exact and compelling, and that's what design can provide. You know, visualization design is really a completely open field that sees also architects getting involved. This is a visualization by Lisa Strausfeld from a few years ago showing the connections between different terrorism cells and different places in the world. It was used in the New York Times Magazine, of course printed, but then it also became dynamically alive on a website. Visualization design also shows the power of design as a political tool. What you're looking at here is an amazing fact. There are data that come from the government of the United States that talk about the fact that there are blocks in cities of the USA where the government spends more than $1 million a year to keep some of the inhabitants of the block in prison or in halfway houses, but not to reintroduce them in society. In a way, it's the passive, it's the empty void that exists in the urbanization of the cities of the United States. You can read these data one day in a newspaper and get really outraged to know that there are more than 300 of these blocks in Brooklyn alone. But you know, when you read something, you get outraged, and then after 20 minutes, you might forget it. But when you see it like that, red over black, like blood stains, it's an image that remains with you forever. So the propaganda and also the comprehension capabilities of design are still underexploited. This particular work is by a lab that is situated at Columbia University that makes science, political science, and design come together. And this instead is the work of a group of architects that you might all be familiar with, together with a group of digital artists. It's Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro. Diller, Scofidio are the architects that are right now redoing Lincoln Center, working together with Ben Rubin to visualize what happens when populations around the world move all together and all suddenly in gigantic migrations because of natural catastrophes or because of displacement generated by genocides or wars. It was installed in Paris in a beautiful round theater, and it was amazingly impressive because it really gave you a sense of the movement of the world, of people in the world. So once again, the emotional, aesthetic, and also informational capabilities of design are endless. And also, the way design is used today to give us access to networks and systems is something that will be really important in the show and in the collection. Of course, we all know that so many of the objects that we use today exist only as instruments, as tools, as pathways to different networks and systems that we need to access. And this is quite a funny timeline of cell phones that shows how also their sizes. I don't know how many of you went to see Wall Street 2. Not a great movie, but it's so great to see Gordon Gekko coming out of prison and getting his big cell phone from 15 years ago. And the same timeline could be done also with different game controllers. This is the work of a student from Carnegie Mellon who actually tracked all the different designs. And more, we will use in the future this idea of accessing systems and also of explaining systems. Some of you might remember this great website by Josh On from 2004 called They Rule, in which Josh was connecting all of the different people on different corporate boards in the United States to kind of highlight and show collusions or relationships that might explain how some people were serving on each other's board. I understand that Josh now lives in San Francisco and works with Amy Franceschini at Future Farmers, and it's a really great design company, activist design company, and they're going to come out with an updated version of They Rule shortly. But what is most fascinating for me as a curator, as a person living in this world, and as a design aficionado, is the openness that we have to new liminal worlds that are a mixture of the physical and the digital, but not in the old-fashioned way, not in the virtual reality way. We do not need to have too many technical capabilities or filters to be able to imagine ourselves in an expanded world. Of course, the new gestural interfaces help us a lot mix, in a way, almost seamless way, our physical world with the world on screen. But it will happen also more and more in the future with new screens that accept capabilities and that let us interact more directly and more gesturally. But even if you go back a few years, and if you look at examples like SimCity, we didn't need to be so sophisticated in technology to imagine ourselves really as venture capitalists and developers of a new fabulous city. And the way we lose ourselves when we start really working inside an interface and really going around a particular different world is fascinating. To the point that there are designers and architects that are working on new platforms. You're seeing top left a platform that was from Design and the Elastic Mind, in which Alex McDowell, who's a production designer, worked together with Greg Lynn, an architect, and with a company that does a lot of game design in order to create a brand new platform that was better than Second Life and yet not as real life. We would like at MoMA to also start acquire these liminal worlds. It's almost like having a new type of architectural collection, an architectural collection that requires a person's presence and interpretation, and that in particular works on this idea of liminal worlds. I'm showing you here the work of Area Code, a really great company that has been pioneering this work. And you're looking at a game from a few years back in which people in the street would be looking at their cell phone screen where they would see the map of the street, the actual map of the Greenwich Village, and a ghost, non-existing, would be following them and trying to eat them. So you see people running desperate in the street, terrified because a non-existing skull is trying to kill them. And I feel that you would do the same and I would do the same, because there's no difference between what we see on the cell phone and what we see in reality. And that's exactly what this diagram tells us. The world that, as designers, as architects, as engineers, as people, we will live more and more in is the strip in between what was physical and what was the old way digital. It's the world that mixes the two seamlessly using our own senses. And that's why we would like, as a museum, to go more and more in that direction. The most recent acquisition that you see bottom right is the @sign. It's really interesting. We acquired it last March. And the word acquisition doesn't make sense anymore. We should ask our general counsel to change it, because we're not taking it away from the world and making it mine. We're just showing it as if it were a planet whose shadow we cast on a wall, just because it's a great, great example of design that's existed since the Middle Ages, where it was already a ligature used by the monks by hand, and that has been brought to new life today, meaning exactly the same thing, but it's become part of our identity. And similarly, we would like to acquire a 747. You would not normally be able to see the connection between the @ sign and the 747, but the true connection is they cannot be had. They are objects that are impossible to possess, unless you're the President of the United States, but even in that case, it's ours, not him. So more and more, what the digital world enables us to do is to have without owning, is to appreciate without closing in a box and in a cage. And I hope that designers will be the ones to highlight these possibilities to everybody in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you.